Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We have two terrific poets with us today, Elaine Equi and Jerome Sala. Elaine will read first and then Jerome. I also want to thank Ed Friedman for his help. Elaine Equi's latest book, Out of the Blank, is forthcoming from Coffee House Press in February 2025. Her other books include Voiceover, which won the San Francisco State Poetry Award, Ripple Effect, New and Selected Poems, which was a finalist for the LA Times Book Award and on the short list for the Griffin Poetry Prize, and Sentences and Rain. Widely published and anthologized, her work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, Brooklyn Rail, Big Other, The Nation, The New Yorker, and in many editions of the Best American Poetry. In 2023, she was the guest editor of the annual anthology, Best American Poetry. In 2024, she received a Guggenheim Fellowship. Here's a superlative poet, Elaine Equi.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you. I'm very excited to be reading in your series. And thank you especially for inviting me to read with my favorite reading partner, Jerome Sala, my husband. So I'm going to read today from two different new publications. I'm excited to have two new books. The first one is the one you mentioned, Out of the Blank, from Coffee House Press. And it's officially out like just in a couple of days. I think the pub date is February 11th. So I will start with some poems from that. And this is the title poem, Out of the Blank. We waited for word to arrive, like a messiah in a stagecoach or a sheriff riding a thundercloud. But she came without a name, a sheer barely there-ness, teaching us first to hum the song of the game show. Essentially, nothing changed, only now it seemed more colorful and easily divided into categories, more fun. Suddenly, everyone took up a hobby. Mine is getting in touch with my antediluvian self, my inner reptile. Fire and tools are still a long way off, and language, well, who's to say we haven't been speaking it all along? This is called Sears, or Sears. It's S-E-E-R-S, Sears, like profits. Eyes are like dice. They see by chance. Of course, if they're healthy, they see what's in front of them, what's given. But not all of it. Certain saints and disturbed individuals see what's not there, have visions and hallucinations. Some people only have eyes for what they're looking for, while others never find it even when it's staring right at them. All these things can be true, but I think eyes are like dice. They see by chance. Buying time. Is time always transparent? The unwet water we live in like bacteria? It should come in different shades, be frosted and opaque. Perhaps if it were something we bought like any other commodity, there'd be more choices. Many people, myself included, feel there's not enough of it. But I don't want it so I can do more. I want it so I can do less, but take longer to do it. A lot longer and a lot less. I want to find enlightenment during happy hour, on a side street lit with neon rain. Take little sips with long naps in between. I don't wish to be a vampire. I don't wish to be a vampire with centuries of memories stored in a youthful body. It is, or could be, such a pleasure, if we didn't fear it so much, to get old and indulge in subversive acts of dawdling, withering, forgetting with impunity. Letting go of ambition served too long, its bitter, sweet ligatures finally breaking down and dissolving. While others feverishly train body and brain in gyms, let me cultivate the corpse flower. Listen to it like a radio in a small room, quietly playing its hypnotic, melodic overture of decomposition. I often like to write poems about objects, and I've done it many times, and then I was trying to think of a new way to do it, so I decided, what if I wrote about emotions as if they were objects? It's been done before by other people, but not by me. So in this poem, it's in three different sections, it's three different emotions. It's called Emotions, a Boxed Set. And the first one is heebie-jeebies. It's the kind of tail and socket anxiety that plugs directly into the body, manifesting in myriad symptoms of dis-ease, heat, chills, itch, lightheadedness attached to a lead weight, a tilted feeling, an agitated remix of all of the above, the scalp, or is it the brain, aflame like a burning bush? Clarity. Being able to breathe in, out. The billowing curtain of cilia and nerve endings stirred by an oxygen breeze. How long can I keep this up? What could be better? Appetite. Even when I'm not thinking about food, I'm thinking about food. I'm feeling the pulsations, the vibrations of phantom food calling. The word chicken becomes a mantra. Burgers appear like bloody daggers in Macbeth. It seems fitting in old age to return to an oral stage when food was of primary importance and time was structured around meals, when you looked at every object and wondered, edible or not. So speaking of food, this is one of my favorite flavors. It's maple. Leave me alone with a jug of this syrup, and who knows what maple mayhem I'll get into. Once someone asked me for my favorite word. I wanted to say malice, but that sounded too mean, so I gave them maple. It did the trick, totally threw them off the scent of my aggression. But I honestly do love maple with its high-pitched sweetness, so piercing only a dog could hear it. The taste speaks to some darkness deep in my soul, where a sleepwalker stands bathed in the light of an open refrigerator, swigging the sticky liquid like bourbon straight from the bottle. I am drinking the blood, she chants. I am drinking the blood of the forest. This next poem is called My Mother and I Send Each Other Circles. And the book is dedicated to my mother. She just died last year. She was 100 years old. And we had this ritual. I would talk with her on the phone every day. And before we would hang up, we'd pick a color. And then we would imagine the other person surrounded by that color. And I was kind of, I don't know what, new agey, like sending energy, or my mother used to say it was like a hug, but with color. So this was our routine. My mother and I send each other circles of light. We telepathically juggle globes of color, enclose ourselves in the space capsule of their spheres. I say, where are you? She says, I'm on the couch looking at the plant. I'm on the couch looking at the TV. I'm on the couch sprawled out with my feet on the cocktail table. I'm in the kitchen looking across. I'm in the bedroom, laying down. Where are you? I say, I'm in the chair, looking at the door. I'm standing up, looking at the bookcase. I'm in the bedroom, laying down. I'm sitting on the bed, looking at the wall. Then one of us says, what color would you like? You choose. I'll take all gold. I'll take pure white. How about white with gold sprinkles? I want green, all different shades. What if we try a rainbow for today? Okay, stay right there. I'm sending it now. I'm still sending it. It's sent. I'm going to read 3 poems now about movies. I feel like many of you worked in the industry, in the entertainment industry, so I'm going to read some movie poems. This one is called Flaming Star, which was a 50s Elvis movie. The poem isn't really about Flaming Star, but that was one of the first movies I ever remember my parents taking me to see. Going to the movies was anarchic back then. You walked in on the story wherever it was in the telling, happy just to sit in the dark and listen to these giants, be with them for an hour or two. Women often taking off their clothes, men often shooting or getting shot. One of the first ones I ever saw was Flaming Star. I remember sad-eyed Elvis staring out at us as if we were a prairie. This one is called Avoidance. I'm not watching the movie, just looking up from my book now and then, puzzled by the actors whispering urgently as if prompting each other to remember their lines. If only they would recite the words on the page in front of me, I'd be more attentive. Actually, I see I'm doing more than simply not watching. I am actively avoiding the film, like an unpleasant topic disguised in furs and jewels. Something about it offends me. I suppose I could put on a different movie, but you were sleeping so peacefully. I didn't want to risk waking you from the lullaby of this pretentious dated melodrama. Not only am I busy avoiding the movie, I am using it as an excuse to avoid continuing to read the book I had started, which, to be honest, isn't so great either. It would seem any activity one chooses might be motivated by the desire to get away from something else. So I have even physically moved to a different room. I can still hear the movie, but faintly, as a kind of spoken music of emotional tones. And without the visuals, it is almost enjoyable. I've also put my book down and have begun writing this poem. Obviously, the activity I was avoiding all along and now can pursue wholeheartedly to the exclusion of everything else. This next movie poem I'm going to sneak in is actually new. It's not in the book, but I have to sneak it in because it was such a good movie. This is The Manchurian Candidate, which I just rewatched a couple weeks ago. And the first time I saw it, I thought it was like, yeah, this is kind of okay. It's good. But then when I saw it a few weeks ago, it was like the right time to see it. I was astonished. The Manchurian Candidate. Lawrence Harvey, he of the glazed eye, who could stay under hypnosis for the length of an entire film, who turns playing solitaire into a dangerous game, a below-the-surface kind of guy, more intense than Dirk Bogarde, less mannered than James Mason, a bit of a Hamlet, the quiet type who ends up murdering his scene-stealing, scheming mother and her sleazy boyfriend, who points even with his name to another assassin, the Lee Harvey Oswald yet to come. This poem is called Never Have I Ever, and it's dedicated to David Trinidad, who's here. Hi, David, and who's reading in this series in 2 weeks. Please come back in 2 weeks so you can hear David. And his favorite color is pink. That's what you need to know. Never have I ever, for David Trinidad. Never have I ever seen such a pink sky, like the tonsils and gums of a hippo, yawning as we ride over the bridge, where a sugar factory sweetens the river and tall buildings melt into the water. The craft. Many people want to find magic, like a new car or computer, want to put magic to work, making more money or keeping them young and immortal. These are the same things people have always wanted, which is how magic grew into capitalism, with magic symbols printed on every dollar. Someone should really find a new use for this old technology, so magic could become magical again. And now I'm going to read from a different book, which is this book. I hold it up. It's very dark. It's hard to see. It's called Double Feature, and it's a chapbook with poems by me and by Jerome. We're both in this book. And it's from Insurance Editions. This is called Wind Chimes in the Glass Mountains. That's the name of my section of that book. Wind Chimes in the Glass Mountains. Bestowing a calm but giddy effervescence, a silver affluence on the after snow of the afternoon, where Stevens counts his blackbirds, and the voices of the twin sopranos scale new heights, melting our cold, cold hearts like lumps of sugar in hot tea. Forgiven, all is for giving. Even the Disney princess in her glass coffin opens an eye to shed a frozen tear. Big globs of the future. Big globs of the future are hanging over us, are washing the mountains clean away, freezing and melting and blooming. Where will we be 100 years from now? Standing around like garden gnomes eating snow cones? Or still rushing off to meet the blind date of our demise? This poem is called Untitled Vivian Meyer, and she was a photographer. She's mainly known for street photography. She lived in Chicago and worked as a nanny. And from like the 50s to the 90s, she took hundreds and hundreds of pictures, but she's a little bit like Emily Dickinson. She never really showed at a gallery and she didn't publish them. It was only after she died that someone found a trunk full of her negatives and luckily realized how fantastic she is. So her reputation keeps getting bigger and bigger. And this poem actually describes a photograph of hers that I was just looking at. So this is Untitled Vivian Meyer. Who can resist a chorus of empty bottles, amber, topaz, green, on a flea market tray? Not Vivian Meyer. That's her reflection hovering over them, camera raised, deliberately catching herself in the act of looking and framing it in a small adjacent mirror. She is looking at the bottles, but reversed in the photo, she appears to be looking at us with a certain suspicious uncertainty. Like Hitchcock, she often made cameo appearances in her photos, would take self-portraits in an era before selfies of her shadow on a wall. There was something democratic about her willingness to place herself among the things she saw, be just another element in the picture. Perhaps there was also a bit of assertiveness, the desire not just to look, but one day to be seen. And 2 more poems. This one is called Ghosts and Garbage. Whenever I take out the garbage, I look for ghosts. Tiptoeing out of my apartment, hefty bag in hand, I scan the hall, hoping to spot one. But if I leave my apartment to get the mail or meet a friend or for any other reason, ghosts never cross my mind. Perhaps the act of discarding things, which, by the way, I love to do, triggers thoughts of mortality in me. Or maybe there is a certain guilt attached to the pleasure I take in throwing things away, unceremoniously dumping them down the chute so they land like a corpse with a thud. Sometimes a fly breezes by, or the light above the tall and the short bin flickers, but no ghosts arrive. What's gone is gone. The only haunting thing is a gentle but persistent admonishment to recycle. And this is called At the Hollywood Forever Cemetery, which I'm sure many of you know. And actually, to bring up David again, I was there with David Trinidad. He is the other person. So this is At the Hollywood Forever Cemetery. We looked for, but could not find, the grave of Rudolph Valentino. So we left our flowers on the grave of Clifton Webb. Thank you. That's it for me.
Thank you, Elaine. Your poetry just it's a wondrous reading. You know, it has great simplicity. It's fun. It's imaginative. There's harmony, and it's poignant. It touches, and you make us see things that we have seen, but we don't really see them until we hear you say them, and you make them see them anew. And I just love that clarity and that simplicity and the harmony that you have in there. You know, you make art with your poetry. I have a couple of questions for you. When did you write your first poem?
Probably, I want to say I wrote some really bad poems in grade school. I have a memory of writing a poem about a haunted school, I like ghost even back then, a haunted schoolhouse or something. And yeah, I think in grade school.
And what is it about the poetry form that attracts you to it?
What I know when I was in grade school, actually, I liked greeting cards. I liked greeting cards because I thought they had like a nice picture on the front, and then there'd be like a little poem on the inside. I liked that format of an image and a poem. So even though most people don't like greeting cards per se, think of them as great poems, that when I was young, it made me think, oh, I want to mimic that. I want to replicate that in some way.
You know, another thing I love about you, when you're reading your poems, like when you read the poem about your mother and the color at the end of the conversation, and I'm just there with you. You know, you put the reader right there with you, or the listener. And I just love that. Since this is the motion picture country home, and you did write about, the classic, The Manchurian Candidate, what are your top 10 movies of all time, or at least a few of your top movies of all time?
Oh, yeah. Jerome and I are always making that list and remaking it. He turned me on to some really good ones. We're both big fans of the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's definitely a favorite. And I don't know what else.
Manchurian Candidate.
The Manchurian Candidate goes on. It's so good. Double Indemnity. Double Indemnity is really good. I've seen that a bunch of times. And I love James M. Cain. What else? We used to like West Side Story a lot. I don't want to say like anything's wrong with West Side Story, but it's just maybe we wore it out because we were West Side Story when we first met. That was our movie. Angel Heart. Jerome is reminding me. Angel Heart. Yes, definitely. With Mickey Rourke.
I think, and Robert De Niro, I think, was in that picture too.
Yeah, he was the devil.
What would you say to a young woman who's sitting down to write her first poem? What would you tell her to focus on?
Listen, it's like, I feel like I mean, I don't have any specific advice, but I mean, I think one of the things about poetry that when I used to teach is to get people to listen to the page as if they weren't really writing it. I mean, so you write the poem and it's you and you're writing, but then you also need to be able to listen in a way where it's like the poem is talking back to you, or maybe you're imagining a reader reading those words. There has to be like a little degree of separation where it's not just you writing what's in your head. Then something else has to happen. Another wall to deflect your thoughts off of.
Yeah, I like that. I think as an actor and a poet, you have to be receptive, and you certainly are.
Yes.
You certainly do that. Where are you from Chicago originally?
Yes.
And do you teach in New York City?
I taught for many years. I'm finally retired, very happily retired. But yeah, I taught at NYU, at New York University, and I taught at the New School for many years, and I even taught at City College of New York.
And when you sit down to write a poem, what is it that kicks off a poem for you? Is it a visual, an image, words, a phrase, or an emotion? What is it that kicks off the poem for you?
I think usually it's a phrase. Often it's like you mishear something or you misread something, and your misreading seems more interesting than what you find out is actually there. So then you want to go back to that where that existed. Where did that come from? That misheard phrase, what you turned in your head. I kind of like sometimes little odd pieces of language catch me, and then I just want to follow them. It's sort of like see where they go.
And since you are retired, what is a life like? I mean, briefly, that you go through in a day being a poet. What does a poet do?
Well, let's see. For breakfast, poets have it's just such a wonderful. I'm gonna knock on some wood. It's such a wonderful luxury to just Jerome and I both write, so it's really nice. We spend a lot of time reading. It's pretty quiet, and then when we get tired and want some noise, then we put on the TV and watch the movies, and it's very mellow. We're pretty quiet. We like to write. We like to read. We like to go out to eat. That's about it.
Well, that sounds ideal. And if I may, I would just like, if you haven't seen a movie, one of my favorite movies in my top 10 is La Talente by Jean Vigo, 1934. And that was the only feature he made. And Truffaut saw the picture when he was 14 and just, was amazed by the picture. But it's very lyrical. I won't tell you the story because we're out of time, but I just want to thank you, Elaine. Your poetry, just the clarity and the harmony, and the radiance of it too. Just beautiful. So thank you once again, Elaine Equi. And our next poet is Jerome Sala. Jerome Sala's book, his latest book, is How Much? New and Selected Poems, NYQ Books. Forthcoming is a chapbook written in collaboration with his spouse, poet Elaine Equi, entitled Double Feature from Insurance Editions. Other books include Corporations Are People, 2 NYQ Books, The Cheapskates, Lunar Chandelier, and Look Slimmer Instantly, Soft Skull. Widely published, his work appears in many anthologies, including Pathetic Literature, Grove Atlantic, and 2 editions of Best American Poetry from Scribner's. Here's an outstanding poet, Jerome Sala.
Thank you. It's a real honor to read for this series. Thank you to Harry Northup for asking us. And it's a real treat to read with Elaine again. When we were first coming up as poets in Chicago, we used to read all together all the time. And since we moved to New York in the 80s, not as much, but whenever we get to do it's really fun. A lot of my poems are kind of redos of older modes or older poems or something like that. Just because I always had this feeling that there was nothing wrong with modern poetry, but sometimes it got a little too old fashioned. So I just want to try to update it. Mm-hmm. So the first poem along those lines it's kind of a redo of an idea Kenneth Cope, the great New York school poet had. He had in a book called One Train, he had a series of poems called A Modern Guide. And it would be like a modern guide to champagne, a modern guide to the French language, a modern guide to the movies or something like that. And each of those poems would start out with, look at this champagne bottle or something, or look at this movie, depending on what the poem was about. So I thought a contemporary version of that would be a guide to TikTok videos. So this is one of those. So this is from A Guide to TikTok after Kenneth Koch. Look at this TikTok video. There is a tiny dog in the foreground. There is a tiny dog in the background. The tiny dog in the background yells to the tiny dog in the foreground, "Hey, what is your name? What is your name? What is your name?" The tiny dog in the foreground finally hears the tiny dog in the background. The tiny dog in the foreground yells back, "Toby. My name is Toby." The tiny dog in the background yells back, "Fuck you, Toby." Next poem is also a redo of an older poem. W.S. Merwin had a poem called Something I've Not Done. And in each stanza, there's a destiny that he hasn't completed that haunts him. So I thought, what's a modern version of that? And I thought about how when you're searching on the internet and you look at a product and you don't buy it, but then it follows you all around the internet. It's in your email stream. You see it on your iPhone. An ad for this product follows you everywhere. So in place of his Something I've Not Done, I have Something I've Not Bought after W.S. Merwin. Something I've not bought is following me. I see it in my Facebook feed, peeking out from the top of my email stream. The stream they promised they'd never sell. Owned by a company I don't know well. Something I've not bought is following me, seeing as I've not bought it again and again. I see the tracks of its ads like tears running down my screens. In the morning, it's there on my phone before breakfast. It seems to pop out of the void in a banner over my browser. I shrug off its warnings, tapping a gray tab that says close. In the evening, before bed, it knows I've spent a whole day not buying it again and again. Not being a person, it doesn't take it personally. But if I ever click on it, I'll never be rid of it. It will inhabit the very soul of my machine, demanding ransom unless I pay or exercise it through a search and destroy mission in my applications file. If I shrug it off, I know it'll be okay. A stranger waving at me from an ocean liner I pretend not to see. This next poem is is a redo, not of a specific poem, but of a kind of a concept. The poet I always admired was Marijane Moore, who wrote a lot of these poems about animals. And many of the animals she never saw. She just opened a book and wrote a poem from the image. So I thought a contemporary version of that would be when you're watching animal videos on YouTube. So I was watching an animal video and wrote a poem from that. And the animal I chose is the honey badger. Its name sounds cute, but actually it's a very vicious creature. So this is called The Goodness of Being Bad. I sense your glory, quote unquote, Marijane Moore. The honey badger is admired as that, quotes, nasty ass creature that just doesn't care. With its poor eyesight, like Schopenhauer's blind will, it is oblivious to opponents. even when it sticks its nose into beehives and devours the nectar within. No bigger than a mid-sized dog, it battles lions and crocodiles when surprised, which happens often when it's digging its nose into the dirt. Its technique, to assault a giant's genitals with its vicious jaws, whose grip is tighter than a black bear's. The honey badger is the hero of the YouTube channel, a sort of totem beast to the new economy. White stripe on back of black fur coat. It looks a little like a skunk, but it's rumored the hide can't be pierced by mere arrow or spear. To kill the honey badger, you must crush its skull or blow its brains out. Is the honey badger a symbol of the entrepreneur, the social media maven, the lumpen naturist, the hunter-gatherer of the virtual mall, the gangbanger of the metaverse, or simply a David in a universe of Goliaths? Such questions pale before the essential one, which is, of course, don't you wish you were like the honey badger? The next poem is, the title actually, my last book was How Much? New and Selected Poems, but I have a new book coming out that I just found out it's getting published, in the midst, so we didn't get into the bio. But it's called Glop. And the idea of this new book is many years ago, the modernist poet, William Carlos Williams, he had this slogan, no ideas but in things. But in my kind of humble opinion, today we have lots of things, but very few ideas. And so when people want to do something new, they just keep piling up more and more things. And it turns into a kind of a glop, a sticky kind of blob-like reality that you have to kind of fight your way through. So this poem is about that. Glop. Some madman in a flavor lab designed the banana vanilla almond milk in my cereal this morning. Slightly purple, somewhat gloppy, it rains viscosity, a cloud's acid reflux phlegm, and turns individual flakiness into a silent, if living, blur. Classic films like The Blob predicted its arrival, which is to say it's old while being new, or perhaps old in its newness, recalling the marketing practice of introducing minor differences into more of the same. Though in this case, the same is already different, as it is not just milk, but almond milk, and not just almond milk, but vanilla almond milk. So to the different, a difference has been added, and so on. This process now entering a Baroque phase. You could even say this product is nostalgic for the good old days when to do the new required less effort. But nostalgic newness doesn't taste that good. Trying this hard requires too many layers, resulting in a sort of sludge. Perhaps this banana vanilla almond milk makes a statement, a slurpy cognitive map, which slips down the gullet, heralding a shift in eras, pop culture to glop culture. Next poem. I think we're getting a little echo in here. Next poem, next two poems is something I don't have a lot of in my work, is personal experience, but these two have some personal experience, so I thought I'd read them. This one's called Under the Golden Horse. It makes sense that when I smile while walking by the woman sitting on a styrofoam collar with a gray parrot on each of her shoulders, she ignores my visual applause of her performance, staring instead intensely, almost angrily, into the windows of the genteel gelateria in front of her. In this city, unsolicited warmth or even mere acknowledgement can be prelude to some sort of con or more dangerous encounter. This is also why it makes sense that when the waiter for to-go orders brings my food under the giant golden horse at P.F. Chang's, he greets me as if I were his oldest friend. It's as if we go back a way, once hanging out on the criminal streets together, recognizing each other as veterans of some urban war. We've been waiting for you, Mr. Jerome, he says, with a warmth that only transactions have the right to elicit. I see you have new dishes on the menu, I say. My wife and I may be by to try a few. That's awesome, he replies. I hope I'm here when you do. And back to redoing old modes, but this has some personal experience too. Out here, many of the great New York school poets wrote poems celebrating knowing famous artists. So I thought a modern version of this in our age of anonymity is a poem about not knowing a famous artist. So this is called Ode to Larry Rivers. Once, when doctors were giving my body the final once-over before an operation, staring through me like cellophane with radioactive machines, I was being wheeled out for my next exam. And in the wheelchair across the aisle, I saw the face of Larry Rivers. Compassionate young people were attending him, spiffily dressed, just as I imagined the progeny of a great artist would be. They laughed, enjoying him, and enjoying each other, enjoying him. But he caught me staring, and he stared right back. He knew I knew who he was, and that I knew he didn't know who I was. And this mutual knowing and unknowing, and the knowing quality of the knowing about knowing and unknowing, seemed to amuse him. He smirked. And in this mortal moment, his recognition of my recognition seemed kind. Okay, since this is a little bit of a longer reading for me, I'm going to do something I rarely do, and that's read a longer poem. This poem, I was thinking, but it's really a bunch of short poems strung together, so you won't be bored by it, hopefully. This poem, I was thinking of the last election, how it was decided on something so materialist like the prices of things. And I thought it would be fun to write a poem which addresses what's most important to all of us, which are the prices of things. So this poem is called On Becoming Smaller, a meditation on shrinkflation. And shrinkflation was big, let's say, last year. If I was, to write a similar poem this year, it would be meditation on, price freezing and meditation on tariffs, let's say. Anyway, On Becoming Smaller, a meditation on shrinkflation. 1. There are things we eat, and to eat them is to eat ourselves. Where we were once big, we are now becoming small. This would be a good thing normally. But when something is forced upon you, it turns into its opposite. Forced leisure is not vacation, but unemployment. Mm-hmm. So what was once about dieting is now about getting fleeced. 2. I must tell you about this fish fillet sandwich. Once a mouthful, now reduced to a slider, a single page within the book of a bun that once held a novel. What some term greed, others describe as a kink in the supply chain, and still others, from a more tranquil distance, the impermanence of appearance. For the fish fillet sandwich, like all things, possesses no essence, and so its nature is change. 3. Shrinkflation is the flip side of inflation. When the labor market is strong and downsizing people is wrong management-wise, producing more with less transforms into charging a lot for a little. Surplus is then generated not from the head of the circulation fish, but from its tail. Without something obtained for nothing, we are told, the something would not appear. And in this way, the land of the free becomes the land of the freebie. 4. Common products affected by shrinkflation. Gatorade 32-ounce bottle, now 28 ounces, a 14% drop. Domino's chicken wings cut from 10 to 8 per order. Burger King vegan chicken nuggets from 10 pieces to 8 per order. Walmart great value paper towels from 168 per roll to 120 while the price stays the same. Hershey's 18-ounce packages of chocolate kisses cut by almost 2 ounces. Hefty's mega bags from 90 bags to 80 without lowering price. Reese's peanut butter cups, 1.6 ounce, 2-pack, cut to 1.5. The proof is in the quotes, the proof is in the numbers. This shrinkflation scheme has lined the coffers of corporate fat cats with record profits. From July 2020 to July 2022, while working people endured a painful 14% inflation rate, after-tax corporate profits skyrocketed by an obscene 74%. Unquote. Amanda Ford, Advocacy for Democracy Fund. 5. To combat this poem's shrinkflated form, to fatten its austere dimensions, to put some meat on its bones, so to speak, and thus to resist in a microcosmic way the new austerity of consumer products, we will now interrupt this message to add some text only tenuously connected with it. Think of it as an extra dollop of tartar on its shark fillet body. Here is Richard Matheson's existential meditation at the end of his novel and later movie, The Incredible Shrinking Man, slightly amended for today's tastes. Enjoy. Quotes, I was continuing to shrink. To become what? The infinitesimal? What was I? Still a human being? Or was I the personality of the future? If there were other bursts of radiation, other clouds drifting across seas and continents, would other beings follow me into this vast new world? So close, the infinitesimal and the infinite. But suddenly I knew these were really two ends of the same concept. The unbelievably small and the unbelievably vast meet like the closing of a giant circle. I looked up as if somehow I would grasp the heavens, the universe, worlds beyond number. The big other silver tapestry spread across the night. And in that moment, I knew the answer to the riddle of the infinite. I had thought in terms of humanity's own limited dimension. I had presumed upon nature that existence begins and ends as humanity's conception, not nature's. And I felt my body dwindling, melting, becoming nothing. My fears melted away, and in their place came acceptance. All this vast majesty of creation, it had to mean something. And then I meant something too. Yes, smaller than the smallest, I meant something too. To the logos, there is no zero. I still exist. 6. Maybe I don't want to buy the whole quart of chocolate milk. It might spoil before I drink it. Besides, as I age, I grow smaller. Once a towering 5'6", now a cowering 5'4.5". Or am I merely rationalizing getting fleeced? One learns not to desire what one cannot have, a centurion says to an empress in a sword and sandals drama, whose name I have forgotten. 7. And then things began to change. Target slashes prices on 5,000 items, including Purcell laundry detergent, 5% lower. Clorox wipes, 15% lower. Purine One cat food, 17% lower. At Walgreens, swim goggles and Squishmallows as much as 40% lower. And then Burger King's new jingle, eat like a king who's on a budget, 3 tasty options, fries, drinks, and nuggets, all for $5. Wait, that can't be right. Just confirm that that's the right price at BK. Have it your way. You rule. Sticker shock has administered electroshock to retailers and the economy. Democracy shatters over the issue of price gouging. Not 8. There's nothing profound to say about shrinkflation, and I have said it. A sad marvel now shrinking away. But to witness the inconsequential is a gesture toward the populist, and therefore to get on some sort of a bandwagon, to approach propaganda, which should be a good thing in poetry, no? But for what cause? And to what end? Thank you.
That was a luminous reading, Jerome. You're just incredible. You have such great narrative strength. Your language, excuse me, you have such a superlative use of language, and excuse me, and you have such a penetrating gaze to see what's there and what's under it all. And you demystify language. You despoil myths, and you look at common languages that we see every day, and you just bring them to life, and then you see the patterns and what's underneath them all. I mean, Horace, he would see the extraordinary in common objects, and you do it, but in a different way. And listening to you talk too along the way, giving us, talking about William Carlos Williams, Larry Rivers, Kenneth Koch, no ideas but in things, and then talking about the litany of things, and there's also you use great satire and humorous. And I remember reading an interview, and you wrote, "I treat the insignificant, the debased, as a source of great truth." So, you're just off the chart. And there's also a common humanity in your writing and the conversation that you have with people. And this has really been a treat. So thank you. Just a few things that have come to mind. You're just great. I will ask you the 2 questions I asked Elaine. When did you write your first poem?
So I wrote my first poem in high school, and then, it was a bad poem. But then I was a singer in a number of bands. And so I kind of put poetry writing aside for a while. And then I stopped singing in bands, and I took up poetry again because I thought it was the next best thing. So I kind of took it up by proxy when I dropped out of singing.
And what is it about poetry that attracts you to it?
I like the forms, playing with the forms. And I like the fact, like you mentioned, Horace, I like the fact that there's a great satiric tradition in poetry. Much more satiric than a lot of other kinds of writings. It's not that prominent in today's poetry scene, but I really treasured that kind of whole tradition from Horace and Juvenal and Alexander Pope and Jonathan Swift and all of that stuff. And that the comic satiric kind of tradition, which is, I think it's, novelists try to do it, and sometimes, and movies try to do it sometimes, but I think it's the most witty in poetry. I like the wit of poetry, I guess.
Yeah. Well, Dorothy Parker, she had wit too, and you are entertaining. My wife Holly, she would go to the supermarket, and she'd always come home and say something she heard. And one time she was at Gelson's, and she said, I was walking down the cereal aisle, and I heard a man talking on his phone, and he said, "I'm in the cereal aisle and I'm overwhelmed. There are like 55 products there."
Yeah. Well, I used to write advertising as well. So I used to write advertising and poetry at night, before I retired. So I felt the form was very similar, actually, to ads and poems have a very, very close relationship. Like Mayakovsky, he was a copywriter for the Soviet government, as well as being a poet,
Well, I think Hart Crane did a little
Art
advertising
Crane.
work early in his life.
Yeah.
Elaine, why don't you come on the show and join Jerome? And I hope you won't mind me asking each of you, but could each of you, starting with Jerome, since he just finished, say something about the poetry that Elaine read on the show, and then Elaine say something about Jerome's poetry that he read on the show. Jerome?
Well, I say we were just talking about wit, and aside from the great beauty and luminosity of Elaine's poetry, I really admire its wit, because there's a tremendous wit, tremendous humor. And Elaine kind of draws on that satiric tradition as well. So that's a real bond I feel with it.
Elaine?
Yes. I was very happy that Jerome read the long last piece. He had a lot of trepidation. Should I read this piece? And I'm really glad, because that's the thing about poetry is sometimes it can, especially me, because I tend to write super short poems. It can seem just too focused. So I like that he took that you can take a bigger range in poetry and make a bigger canvas.
And as you both mentioned, humor. And for me, your poetry is also entertaining. And usually we think of entertainment, all right, as a poet, I love to go to a poetry show. And we see one person reading his or her poetry, telling his or her story, but it's rare, entertainment in terms of, most comedians are on nightclubs or, TV movies, but this has really been one of our great shows. So you both not only opened my mind and helped me see things, common things, better and anew, but it was also uplifting as good poetry always is, and it was entertaining. So thank you once again, Elaine Equi and Jerome Sala. And I'm going to make an announcement before we get off. Next Tuesday, two wonderful poets, Pam Ward, LA, and Sharon Mesmer will be with us. And she lives in New York City, I believe. So thank you once again, Jerome Sala and Elaine Equi. And here's our Jennifer Clymer, our great director, to take us home. Today is our 236th poetry show. And it's just amazing to have a poetry program in the motion picture country home. And thank you, Jennifer Clymer.
Thank you, Harry. And thank you both so much. I unfortunately now have the Burger King theme song running through my head. So thank you for that. I very much love this hour and appreciate the gift that all of you give of not just your incredible talent, but your time in sharing it and giving voice to it. So thank you very, very much. We are going to hand it over to the Cinephiles now. And Harry, we'll see you next week.